Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk about something that may sound a little bit like a sociology paper, like with a big title and a subtitle, but I will try to bring it down to Mars. A little bit about myself. My day job is high-tech. I like to think of myself as a high-tech entrepreneur. And then I like to think about myself as an education entrepreneur, fixing education all over the world. And I failed, spent several years trying to do that and declared failure a while ago. And now I'm trying to think about myself as a civilization entrepreneur. And this is the context of what I'm talking about here, which is a civilization on Mars. This particular presentation is based on a paper being written by 3 Italian sociologists and myself. And they are related to the Italian Mars Society, and I'm related to the Israeli Mars Society. And that's about it. And also, I'm from Earth. I'm from there.
But you're going there with the rest.
Yeah, exactly. Now, what I want to talk about in this short presentation, if we think about whether we're talking about the travel to Mars or on the Mars on the ground, then I'm interested more on the Mars ground. It's longer. It has to do with the civilization. It doesn't have to do just with the way of getting there. Now, in the technology versus human factor decision, the human factor is more interesting to me right now, even though, as I said, I work with technology. One reason is that the technology has a lot of discussion and a lot of work is being done already on the technology. And it seems to me that the human factor is still quite open to doing new things. Now, inside the human factor, there's a question about whether we're talking about individual people, like the psychology of individual people, or the sociology of small groups, or the sociology of large groups. Now, the term large group is not very well defined. I can loosely define it as enough people that not everybody knows everything about everybody. So maybe larger than 120 people. 120 people is a number that sometimes appears as something that's beyond the ability of one person to know everything about the others. So, since we're talking about a civilization and not just about a group, large group is the subject of this discussion. Also, we see that there is quite a lot of work done on individual psychology, and we see that there's analog missions for small groups. But with large groups, it's very difficult to create an analog mission. What we could do is go and find other examples of what humans have been doing on Earth and learn from them as much as we can. What we look at in this particular paper are 2 examples, an example and a model, that how humans have created large-scale communities. What we're looking at are specific examples that we're thinking about, but there are quite a few other examples that we could talk about. These are just, again, just examples. Something about what it is to create a new civilization or to go to a new place. Now, the top picture is from 1855, going west. Very tough, very difficult. And yet, you see that there's animals, and there's food for the animals. Yeah. And if you run out of food, you can eat the animals. On the bottom part, you see that there's just about nothing. You need to not only create your own food, you need to create your own water, you need to create your own air, you need to create your own energy, you need to create your own everything. Now, in harsh environments, even on those on the top, the environment is not very forgiving. If I make a mistake, people die. If other people make mistakes, people die. If just fate does something, people die. And this is something that needs to be built into the psyche of the people and the group and the civilization, at least until it becomes safer. That there's a lot of responsibility on each of us. And beyond that responsibility, stuff will happen. Now, an interesting issue here is who sent these people to California, and who will send these people to Mars. And I like to concentrate on the individuals who decide to go there or who send themselves there. I'm not sure if on the way west there was a very organized movement. What I've been reading is about people who decided to go. With the Mars, there is a serious danger in my mind that organization will play a very important part. Because to get to Mars, you don't just find a few friends and go on a convoy. But to get to Mars, you need a lot of resources, a lot of organized resources. And indeed, in the beginning, there is a need for organization. Like, again, even on the way to the West, they had to be organized. They had to have a leader or a commander. They had to give up quite a few of their personal liberties, individual liberties, and do what's good for the group, because otherwise nobody would have survived. And this is going to happen also with Mars. Again, it's just the nature of being in an emergency situation. But the question is, will we be wise enough to remember that the emergency situation is not permanence? It's going to be there only for a few generations. For a few generations, probably they will live in a state of emergency, which will require people to submit to an organization, to a higher will. This is an interesting issue, how to put this into the psyche of the people. How to put what's happening today, the fact that there's dangers today, it's pretty easy for us. How to put the idea that 1, 2, or 3 generations from now, we will need to become, or we will be able to become free again, to become individualistic again, that's an interesting question. So, the example I want to talk about one example and one model. The example is a certain mine in northeast Russia called Kupol. It's very remote. It's hundreds of miles from anywhere. They mine gold there. Until recently, the work was being done as a gulag, as part of a gulag. But it now is a major technologically based mining facility, said to be the most modern in the world. There's 600 people working there at any one time. But it's not really a civilization, because the workers there, even though their every need is taken care of, they are there without their families. They are there as professionals. The mission statement is very simple and very direct: dig for gold, and that's it. And that is part of the reason why they're controlled, or their fate is controlled from certain central authority that doesn't have much to do with them, because that authority creates a situation where they can live and work there, and that authority tells them what needs to be done. So it may be a good idea, or may give us some good ideas about how to create an initial settlement, but in the long run, when the settlement becomes something that's more multidimensional and not just with one mission to dig for gold, we will need to look for other examples. The model we look at is kibbutzim in Israel. About 100 years ago, people started creating a new kind of settlement, a new kind of community in Israel. And it was, again, in a relatively harsh environment, very remote from what they were familiar with. They were not sure they could survive. They did not know how to work the earth. They did not know how to make a living. So it was an emergency situation, and again, they submitted to a higher type of organization, which was the kibbutz itself, the community itself. It was very communal. It was pretty much communistic. No personal wealth accumulation. And one thing you can see that's maybe similar to the previous picture is the kind of large buildings. It's not individual buildings for individual people. In this case, these are the showers, the common showers. And we can use, again, we can learn from them how they were created, how they succeeded, and how they failed, or in what way they may have failed. These days, many people think of them as having been a failure because they don't look like this anymore. Many of them became much more individualistic, but this can be seen as just adapting to the external situation, which has changed. A major issue in such situations, both in Kupol and in kibbutzim and in Mars, are the need for self-reliance. In kibbutzim, they were created tens of miles from any other settlement or where people could help them, but we could walk in a day or so. Kupol is hundreds of miles, and in winter you can drive, in summer you have to fly. New Zealand, which is another interesting example, which really, they have still, to this day, a culture of self-reliance and of reusing everything and not relying on something to come from the outside to help them. But you can fly. And with Mars, it's a whole different story. It's how do you call it? The lines of support, the support lines are several orders of magnitude longer than what we're used to. And we cannot get support unless there's a guy here, Craig, who gave a talk yesterday about getting to Mars in a couple of days. So if he manages to do that, that would change the situation. But again, the self-reliance has to be burnt in the psyche of the individuals and the groups and the organizations. The whole civilization in the first few generations will have to be based on the self-reliance. Now, who goes to Mars? And I'm not talking about which people, but about the very fact that it's people, it's the individuals. There's a great danger, again, in my mind it's a danger, that states will go to Mars, countries will go to Mars, Earth civilization will go to Mars. And if that's the case, then we will bring to Mars our own old grudges. We will bring to Mars our own conflicts. Even 100 years after we go to Mars, if there's a conflict here on Earth, it will spill over to Mars. We need to be able to create a new civilization of the same species. Same species, a different civilization. Also, the variety will give us some more chance of surviving any problems. So, a few details that we can learn, again, mostly from kibbutzim. I love this. To plan ahead. Now, planning ahead can be done by somebody in an ivory tower at first, and it can be useful, what the person in the ivory tower can plan. The person in the ivory tower can, as the guy who talked at 1:30 here talked about, can study history of exploration and learn from it. They can learn the history of creating communities, creating civilizations, as what we're trying to do here, and learn from that. This is a starting point. Part of planning is also getting the preparation right, preparing the people. Now, the Mars 160 people talked quite a bit about the preparations and the fact that they were preparing before they went. They sat together, they created their own community. They trained not just for the technological and for the professional issues that were at hand, that's good, but they trained in being a community. And they were tested in being a community. And also, part of this preparation, which may not have been necessary for the Mars analog mission, is that the people who sit together and are going to go to become the community need to be able to decide what kind of values they have, what kind of a community they want. This is one thing that we learned from kibbutzim. If an authority tried to impose a way of life or to define a way of life ahead of time that is not dependent on the people, it usually failed. If we want the community to continue, and we want the community to continue because we want to build a civilization, not just an instance of exploration, we want it to be based on something that comes from the grassroots, from the people themselves. So part of the preparations is letting the people sit together and decide what values they have, how they want to live their lives. And this is indeed what was happening in kibbutzim in many cases, that they had a period of preparation that could take months, where they learned, they took some city kids and taught them how to do agriculture and how to live together and figure out who they are and what they're about and who the group is. Another issue with a big name is knowledge management. Now, there's quite a few stages to knowledge management. There's a stage of accumulating knowledge ahead of time, knowledge we guess we're going to need. Now, in the kibbutzim case, it was agricultural knowledge, trying to figure out what kind of crops we can grow and how we can grow them. And what often happened is that when the people went and started trying to grow the crops, they discovered that the ground did not behave quite the way they expected, and the water did not quite behave the same way, and the climate was not exactly the same. And the people did not quite behave correctly because they didn't know enough about agriculture in general. So there's accumulating as much knowledge as we can ahead of time, then very quickly discovering that it's probably not very useful, and very quickly updating it. And then once we update it, we need to retain it, we need to disseminate it, we need to maybe get it back to Earth base so that they can rework it maybe for the next few groups. And we need to retain it for ourselves for, again, for generations. One thing about emergency knowledge, just a personal story. Some 20 years ago, I went to travel on the very north of Canada, beyond the Arctic Circle, and I was walking on an iceberg, not iceberg, glacier, a glacier. And the glacier was covered with some snow, with fresh snow, and I had the existing knowledge, the previous knowledge, the theoretical knowledge, that there are crevasses. Exactly. And I had an existing method to deal with that, which is to walk where I see footsteps of others ahead of me. So I walked in the footsteps of others, and on the, 5th or 50th step, I was up to here in a crevasse, even though I walked in the footsteps of somebody who went there ahead of me. And very quickly, I developed the ability to see the crevasses underneath the snow. So in emergency situations, relevant knowledge appears And then it needs to be, again, retained and disseminated and maybe improved upon. Another thing that's very important for civilization, for a long-term community, is to be in a continuous adaptation. Not to take the first ideas as good as they may have been and walk away with them. We have to see the situation as it happens and adapt. In this picture, it's a real picture from a meeting in a real kibbutz. And you can see the people there are not 30 years old. Now, they were 30 or 20 years old when they began the kibbutz. But something has changed. And you must be able to adapt. Now, adaptation can be adaptation to the age of the people, and then you have to decide how to deal with old people. And then maybe you need to experiment different types of, different ways of dealing with old people, whether to put them together in an old folks home, or whether to put them with their families, or whether to give them the freedom to decide which way to go, how to deal with healthcare. There's quite a lot of decisions that need to be done, and it's not clear where we look at them from the very beginning when they are 20 years old. It's not clear what the right way to do it will be. But we have to be able to adapt. Now, this is a simple example of adaptation. A more complicated way of, more complicated issue in adaptation is when the people start to change their mind, or the people evolve in the way they think about who they are. When they started the kibbutz, they thought about socialism and ideology, but maybe their kids already see their friends with smartphones or with TV or with whatever earthly goods or Marsly goods, and they envy and they want to be maybe more individualistic. And we saw that in some kibbutzim, the central forces, the ideological forces, did not allow any change or did not allow much change. They said, this is our ideology, we need to be socialistic, and we need to give up most of our individualistic wishes. And we saw that many of these kibbutzim ended up breaking. So they did not change for quite a while, and then something broke. Whereas kibbutzim who were more liberal and allowed continuous change to happen in response to whatever external forces affected them, they seemed to thrive better. And again, this is something that needs to be very clear to the people, in the individuals, and to the community and the civilization that we're building there. That we will need to adapt. Our ideas, no matter how wise they are right now, we'll have to adapt them continuously. Now, what I want to take away from this study is two things. First of all, learn from Earthlings. We don't have to invent all the wheels. We can choose which wheels we invent and which wheels we just take from Earthlings. But also, to put it in our mind that we're creating a new civilization. We're not creating a colony. I don't like the use of the word colony because a colony is just an extension of an existing civilization. We're creating a new independent civilization. And this will take care of the two problems that, for me, are the reasons to go to Mars. One problem is that we're as humans, humanity, is going to destroy the Earth, it seems, or going to cause a lot of damage to Earth. And even if we don't do a lot of damage to Earth, natural forces can create a lot of damage to Earth. So it's dangerous to have all our eggs in one basket. And this is an issue that's been discussed. But also something that bothers me a lot is that it's not very easy anymore, and maybe not possible at all, to create a startup civilization, to create a startup community. I mentioned that I tried to fix education and I hit a brick wall because the organizations that deal with education are very powerful, and they have a very powerful hold of the humans. And the organizations do with education what's convenient for for the organizations themselves, which is to perpetuate the power of the organizations. And when we try to create a new way of educating, the organizations won't let us. And organizations in this case is governments, is teachers' unions, and stuff like that. So all over the West, it is very difficult to create a new way of educating. It is difficult to create a new way of living, because you still need to pay your taxes, and you still need to do everything that the organizations are used to. Now, if we talked about this 300 years ago, I may have said, okay, I'm going to go on a ship, and I'm going to go to the new world. But the new world is not new anymore. It's just like the old world, because it was created as an extension, as a colony of the old world. It did work for maybe 150 years or so. It was pretty different. But in the last several decades, it's become very much like the old world. And personally, what I want to be able to do is to create a new civilization, or new places, a new frontier, an ish term that was mentioned before, a new frontier where new things can happen. So the humanity does not stagnate. This is basically the presentation. The people who did the presentation are here. It's myself. If you want to email me, you can email me. And there are a few other researchers who did the real work from various universities in Italy. And we have 2 minutes for questions. Yeah.
You somewhat touched on it, but do you think that there are some societies that are unable to spawn off a group that could go be frontiers people like that, that they become so accustomed to smartphones and whatnot that they can't really live in a state of emergency for a couple of generations?
I think it would be extremely difficult for anybody I know. It would be extremely difficult because of the state of emergency, but also because of the issue of just changing.
But like Americans, they have a hard time with Houston or Florida right now with hurricanes and getting a short something like that.
Right.
As opposed to Syrians who are abandoning everything and creating frontiers and crossing an ocean and then starting a whole new life.
Well, a good disaster is great. A good disaster really puts people back in the place where they can think about changing.
Where are they going? They don't have a place. The Syrians, they don't have a place to go. There's no place to accept them. So they have to go to Mars.
Well, I think we failed them by not preparing Mars soon enough.
That's my question.
Yeah.
Is don't you think that in going to a more primitive place, we have to develop new skills, new technologies that we will have to engineer from the ground up? We won't be able to just go and take and collect. We will have to create.
Absolutely, absolutely. We can learn from Earthling what the Earthling have done before, but we will have to create new things as well, definitely, in terms of technology and in terms of social way of being. Yeah. Yeah.
When you put that slide up about forming a new independent civilization, who in your mind is going to be deserving of going and forming that? Who's going to
I have a great answer. We, the people.
everybody?
Yeah, yeah. Definitely not some authority. So I think it's 301. Thank you very much.
Winner of America's Got Talent.